Welcome everyone to the Montana Bumble Bee Atlas participant training for 2025. So we'll be covering the Atlas protocols this evening, set you up with everything that you need to succeed as a Bumblebee Atlas volunteer. So my name is Michelle Toshak. I'm a conservation biologist with the Xerces Society, and I coordinate the Montana Bumble Bee Atlas. So I'm based out of Livingston, Montana. And joining me is Amy Dolan. I'll turn it over to you, Amy, to introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm Amy Dolan. I'm also a conservation biologist with the Xerces Society. I'm the coordinator of the Mountain States Bumblebee Atlas, which covers Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and Nevada. And I'm here tonight as in a supporting role. So I'll be watching the chat, I'll be watching the Q&A, and I'll just here to support Michelle and to support all of your efforts. So thanks.
Thanks, Amy. The mission of the Xerces Society is to conserve invertebrates in their habitats. We have a nationwide team working on a variety of different issues. So in addition to the Bumblebee Atlas program, we have other community science projects like the Firefly Atlas and Milkweed Mapper. And we also work on issues surrounding aquatic invertebrates, pesticides, habitat creation, and much more. So to learn about the work that we do, you can visit our website and follow us on social media. Xerces is a member-supported organization. A huge thank you to those of you who are already members and support our mission. You can learn more about the perks of membership by visiting our site. So for the first part of this webinar, I'll cover the important updates for 2025. So since we have some all-star returning volunteers, I'll ask that you stay for this very first section, and then you can optionally stay for the remainder of the webinar as a refresher. And we'll take a pause after this section to answer any questions that you might have. So Amy and I listened to your feedback from last year. We've developed some exciting new resources to assist you as volunteers. These resources are found at our project homepage. If you're new to the program, I'll give you a tutorial of this page a little later. The first resource we developed for you is a one-page checklist to use in the field as a reminder of the most important parts of the survey. So speaking of training, I'm going to cover a lot of information in this webinar tonight. Amy and I have created a training video series, which is divided into the different steps of the project. So if you're listening to this webinar tonight, you get a little distracted, say during the photographing bumblebees section, you can go to the Train Online page and just watch the part 6 about photographing bumblebees as a refresher. So also based on your feedback, I made some updates to the Montana ID guide that should assist you on your process of identifying bumblebees. We also have some optional Q&A webinars scheduled throughout the season. So these are opportunities for you to ask us questions, connect with other volunteers, and hear field season updates. So we have 2 of these scheduled, one June 10th and one August 7th from 6:30 to 7:30. And then July 17th is going to look a little bit different. So a number of people have asked for more resources on bumblebee identification. So Amy and I will be covering sort of an intermediate of bumblebee ID. So we won't be doing a deep dive of all of the species in our regions, but we'll give you some tools and tricks that are a little bit more than what we can cover in a webinar like tonight. These events you can register for under our events website. So as of December 2024, Suckling cuckoo bumblebee was proposed as endangered under the Endangered Species Act. This is a bee that hasn't been seen in Montana since 2015. As a cuckoo bee, which you'll learn more about a little bit later if you're a new volunteer, it's a parasitic bee which invades the nest of bumblebees, using mostly the Western bumblebee as its host, and sometimes the Nevada bumblebee. One of the key features of this bee is to look at the tip of the abdomen, which has a protruding ridge. It gives the bee kind of a curved appearance. So if you think that you see this bee, I really want you to pay attention to the tip of the abdomen and take a number of photos of that area of the bee. So what does this mean for the Bumblebee Atlas? So currently, There's a public comment period open until May 19th. The final listing date will be January 2026 at the earliest. What that means is that you can conduct your Bumblebee Atlas survey as normal. There's nothing that you need to change as far as your process or your protocol. So a few key features to look for. Since it's a cuckoo bumblebee, it won't have a pollen basket. So look at the hind leg. The first part of the abdomen is mostly black, and the bottom part of the abdomen is predominantly yellow. There is some variation of this, so be aware of that. And one of the most important features to look for is the colors of the hair on the face and the top of the head. So look at the front of the face and the top of the head and take lots of photos of that area. Suckly cuckoo bumblebee has black hair on the face and the top of the head. Other cuckoo bumblebees that we have in the area have some yellow coloration of those hairs. So if you think that you found Bombus sucklei, we want you to record your GPS coordinates, hopefully with high accuracy. Take lots of detailed photos, as many as you can, especially of the tip of the abdomen and the head face area. And as you submit this observation on Bumblebee Watch, please keep this observation private. There's a setting that you can do that returning volunteers are familiar with. It's a little box that you will check directly in Bumblebee Watch. You can also reach out to me and just give me a heads up so I can go into Bumblebee Watch and identify your record. Okay, so that was a very quick 2025 update. Any questions from returning volunteers? And also if there's anything that came in the Q&A that Amy, you would like me to answer.
There's no questions in the Q&A or the chat yet, just some enthusiasm in the chat about the Bumblebee ID session.
Okay, lovely. So if you're a returning volunteer, we invite you to stay for the remainder of the session, but this will be a review for you, a bit of a refresher. So for tonight's training, I'm going to cover what is a Bumblebee Atlas, why are we doing this, and how do I participate. We're going to emphasize the how part of this so that you can understand the logistics of doing a survey. We have a number of resources available for you, and I just want to break down the different websites since there can be a little bit of confusion around this. So the bumblebeeatlas.org website is our project website. This is where we have important resources, training materials, and every year we have a data highlights page. I'm actually going to switch over now and show you a quick tutorial of that website. Amy, you can tell me if you can't see my screen, but I'm going to proceed as I assume everything is good here. So this is bumblebeeatlas.org. You will go to Get Involved, find your atlas, and from here you can go to Mountain States, which includes Montana, and go to Explore. This is the main project page. So we have so much information on this page that we provide to you to succeed as a volunteer. So just to quickly scroll through some of the important resources here, we have a participant handbook, which is kind of the guide for everything you need to know to be involved in this program. This is where you can find information like this one-page cheat sheet, links to additional training videos, priority grid cell maps, data sheets, etc. Also, I want to point your attention to this top bar here because we have a lot of other information that you can find here. So one really good place to go is resources. We have pages like photography tips. We have pages like equipment. There's just a lot of information that we provide here, so I encourage you to get familiar with this site. Okay, the other website that you will be using is bumblebeewatch.org. This is our data website. So this is where after you complete your survey, you'll be uploading photos of bumblebees and all of the corresponding data. You can also explore the data that you and others collect so that you can get a picture of the greater contribution that everyone is doing for bumblebee conservation. The Xerces.org website isn't a website that we use directly to participate in the Bumblebee Atlas, but it's good for you to know about because Xerces provides a lot of resources as well. Things like native plant lists, informational brochures about starting pollinator habitat. So feel free to explore that website. We also have a podcast and a blog that you might be interested in. So what exactly is a Bumblebee Atlas? Montana Bumble Bee Atlas launched last year. We also added a number of states in the Rocky Mountains that Amy coordinates. And our main goal is to find, photograph, and map native bumblebees. This is a collaborative effort. So the Bumblebee Atlas is now active in 20 states, and we work with a number of federal, state, and local partners. Here in Montana, the project is funded by the Forest Service, and we work closely with Missoula County Department of Ecology and Extension. This is a unique community science program in the fact that it's a large-scale program, and the protocol is established to be standardized and effort-based. What this means is that we can compare the data that we collect over time and analyze this for important conservation tools. We also have a number of engaged volunteers and partners that are able to collect data on a large scale. Our main questions for this project are: where are the bumblebee species, what habitats are they using, and which flowers are they relying on? We couldn't do this work without you. We have a large network of volunteers who are very engaged in this program, so thank you so much for being here tonight and contributing your effort. Bumblebee research could not be advanced simply by scientists and researchers alone, and especially now we depend on your support, so thank you. So next we're going to talk about why the work is important. So plants need pollinators for transfer of genes for reproduction. We know that around 85% of flowering plants require an animal for pollination, and that animal is usually an insect. Bees need flowers to provide nutrition for them and their offspring. So for all these reasons, pollinators are considered keystone species. They're organisms that play a disproportionately large role in their environment. Without them, the world would look and function pretty differently. There are 6 main groups of insect pollinators, including butterflies, flies, moths, wasps, beetles, and bees. Everyone except bees are consuming nectar and or pollen as adults, while bees, which you can see here with this huge blob of pollen on its leg, they're collecting pollen to rear for their offspring. Because of this, bees are the most efficient pollinator. They're collecting and transporting pollen to bring back to their nest and transferring large amounts of pollen on flowers as they do this. Bees have evolved very unique pollen-carrying structures, such as this pollen basket on this bumblebee on the far left, carrying this purple pollen. The next image is showing modified hairs on the underside of the abdomen of this leafcutter bee. The next image is showing hairy legs on this mining bee. And the last bee is a little tricky because it doesn't appear to have any pollen-carrying structures. But in fact, it carries pollen and nectar internally and will regurgitate it for their young. The value of pollination extends beyond helping plants reproduce. So the fruits and seeds from the plants serve as food for wildlife, from songbirds to small mammals, all the way up to grizzly bears. Pollinator habitat is compatible with the needs of other wildlife, providing not only food, but shelter. And pollinators themselves are a vital part of the food chain. We know that 96% of songbirds rear their young on invertebrates. So now we get to talk about bumblebees as pollinators. So they're active from early spring to late fall. They're adapted to fly in cool temperatures, and they can perform this really cool thing called buzz pollination, which is this video that's shown here. So some plants will not release pollen from their anthers unless they are buzzed at a very specific frequency. Bumblebees are able to do this, honeybees cannot. So what this bee is doing here is that it's latched on to this flower, this banana-shaped part of the flower here, and it is just vibrating its wing muscles. That's able to produce a specific vibration that the plant can release the pollen. This is a very cool thing that bumblebees and some other wild pollinators can do. We know that some bumblebee populations are at risk, and a number of years ago, specialists from the International Union of Conservation of Nature came together to assess all of the bumblebee species in North America. And what they found is that we'll start with the positive news in green. So 28 species were found to be of least concern, but all of the species in yellow, orange, or red were anywhere from near threatened to critically endangered. So about 1/4 of bumblebees in North America are facing some degree of extinction risk. Here in Montana, we have 4 species known to be in decline. Based on that IUCN assessment, these 4 species were listed either as vulnerable or critically endangered. So Western bumblebee, American bumblebee, and Morrison were considered vulnerable, and Suckly cuckoo bumblebee was assessed as critically endangered. Since then, they all have been petitioned for protection under the Endangered Species Act, and the Suckly cuckoo bumblebee has been proposed as endangered as of December last year. Bumblebees face many threats, and many of them are interacting. So we know some of the leading causes of threats include habitat loss and fragmentation, pathogen from commercial bumblebees like honeybees and commercial bumblebee colonies, pesticides, competition from commercial bees, and climate change. But there's a lot of things that we can do to conserve pollinators. Planting flowers, providing nesting and overwintering habitat is very important. Also, being an advocate, talking about pollinator conservation, talking with your neighbors about the weed and feed that they're using, things like that can all add up to making a difference for pollinators. And what we'll be focusing on tonight is helping gather data for community science projects like the Bumblebee Atlas. Now I want to share with you some essential bumblebee background knowledge that will help inform how you conduct your surveys. So bees need the right nutrition all season long, which they can get from a variety of flowers. So nectar provides sugar for bees. This fuels adult bees for flight and daily activity. Pollen provides protein and fat. This is critical for larval growth, egg production, and overall colony health. But pollen is the only source of protein for bees. Flowers range anywhere from 2 to 60% in protein and 1 to 20% in fat. So plant diversity is really important for bumblebees. It helps them meet their nutritional needs across the season. Bumblebees are considered generalists. They'll use a variety of plants throughout their lives compared to the narrow requirements by many wild bees. So let's go through the colony life cycle of a bumblebee. In the winter, a solitary queen will have buried herself in a few inches in the ground, just waiting out the winter. In spring, you'll start to see these huge queens out foraging on flowers and building up her strength. You're probably starting to see a lot of queen bees around Montana now. So she'll seek out a suitable place for a nest, often in abandoned rodent burrows, but sometimes in rock piles or in bunch grasses, or occasionally I hear about things like them using a dryer vent or a hole in someone's house. The queen will collect reserves for herself and store them in this little wax pot so she can sip from nectar while she incubates her first batch of eggs. Her daughters will hatch and begin foraging for pollen and nectar, as well as tending to the nest. The queen will stay in the nest for the remainder of the season, rearing young. The colony will continue to grow until there's a seasonal switch in the late summer, early fall, where the colony begins producing new queens and males. From there, the queens will emerge, they'll find a mate, and the males will start patrolling, seeking out queens from other areas, and oftentimes staying outside of the nest at night. Sometimes, if you're out looking for it, you'll find a flower that's just lined with sleepy male bees. It's absolutely adorable. And at the end of the season, the original queen who started the colony will die, as well as the worker bees and the males. The only bees to survive are the new queens. So then the new queens will bury themselves for winter and start the process all over again. So what I just explained to you is the life cycle of a typical bumblebee, but this is where things start to get a little interesting. So cuckoo bumblebees are social parasites. They emerge once a lot of bumblebee colonies have already been established. They come in, kill the host queen, and trick the workers to rear the cuckoo bee's young instead of their own young. This is a healthy sign of an ecosystem. We do not put a value judgment on parasites, and this is something that we would expect to find in healthy ecosystems. So these are not necessarily a bad thing. Cuckoo bees look a little different than regular bumblebees. They have thick heads and mandibles. They have this extra thick exoskeleton. They just look like they're built for battle. They have strong stingers, and they don't have a pollen basket. So that's one key feature that you can use to distinguish cuckoo bumblebees from regular bumblebees. We have 3 species within Montana. The indiscriminate cuckoo is our most common. Fernald cuckoo is uncommon, but we did see a number of them last year. And then the suckly cuckoo hasn't been seen since 2015. So besides this information being interesting, hopefully for you, this can be really useful in planning your surveys. So the field season runs from June 1st to August 31st here in Montana, and we want to get peak colony numbers of worker bees during this time. So this is something that you can think about as you're seeing the life cycle of bumblebees happen now in your yards or garden, and start noticing those worker bees starting to come out. I'm not able to go into a ton of detail about ecology and conservation of bumblebees tonight during this webinar, but the Bumblebee Atlas team just put on this hour-and-a-half long webinar that dives into ecology and conservation. So we encourage you to watch that if you want to learn more about this type of stuff. To go there or to access this video, you go to the Bumblebee Atlas website, go to resources, and train online to find this. Next, we'll be talking about identifying bumblebees. So the main thing to know here is that we're not getting into specific bumblebee ID. We have 29 species here in Montana, and ID is really challenging. What we're going to focus on tonight is how can you tell the difference between a bumblebee and a non-bumblebee. And to kick us off here, you all get to take a little bit of a quiz. So there are 8 insects shown on this slide. How many of these do you think are bumblebees? So take a moment, look at these images, and type your answer into the chat. And if you're feeling shy, you can submit your answers just to panelists and not to everyone. But I'm starting to see some answers coming in, so this is great. Okay, so there are many bumblebee mimics in nature, seeing a wide variety of answers. but there is only one bumblebee in these images. So this bumblebee circled here in red, this is a Bombus bifarius. This is our most common bumblebee in Montana. So if you did a survey last year, you probably saw this bee. All of the rest of the images are flies, and some of these are kind of trick questions because you can't see all of the features that you would need. We'll get more into photography of bumblebees later, but this is really an emphasis for looking at insects from multiple angles to get a bigger picture of what they look like. But a few things to note here. Well, actually, I'm just going to keep going because I break this down, so never mind. Okay, so bumblebees in general are broken into three segments. So we have the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Bumblebees have 4 wings. They have long antennae. They have eyes on the side. And the main feature that makes a bumblebee is that they have pollen baskets. So this is the shiny concave groove on its hind leg. And I'll circle this here just to show you what I mean. If a bumblebee has collected a bunch of pollen, it's very easy to tell because it'll have this big ball of pollen on its hind leg. But if it's empty, you can see that concave shiny groove. And bumblebees also are large-bodied and generally covered with hairs. To compare this with flies, flies have 2 wings. Flies are usually not as hairy as a bumblebee. Flies have large bulging eyes. For a lot of flies, their entire heads look like eyeballs, whereas bumblebees have eyes on the side of their head. And flies have these short, stubby antennae, and bumblebees have long, jointed antennae. What I mean by that is that there's like a little hook or an L shape to the antennae. So for that quiz that you all took, the rest of those, besides that one bumblebee, were all flies. They had those generally big fly eyes and only 2 wings. Okay, so now another quick quiz. What do we think this is, a bumblebee or a fly? All right, you all passed the test and can continue in the process. So this is a fly. You can see those huge eyes, but this one is really tricky because it's a bumblebee mimic. So this is an orange-legged drone fly. So it has a very hairy body. If you just saw the body of the fly without the eyeballs, you might think for a second that it's a bumblebee. But if you get a look at those big eyeballs, you know for certain that it is a fly. Honeybees are something that you will often see on your survey, so it's important to distinguish the difference. They also carry pollen in a pollen basket, so you'll see that big ball of pollen on its hind leg. But they're quite a bit smaller than most bumblebees. So they're medium-sized and they have a torpedo-shaped abdomen, whereas bumblebees have a very rounded abdomen for the most part. Their abdomen is black and brown and just generally not as hairy. But if you catch the bee in your net while you're doing a Bumblebee Atlas survey, and you can look into the eyes of a honeybee, they have hairy eyes, which this last photo shows here. Okay, the last category is really challenging. So the image on the left is a bumblebee. The image on the right is a digger bee. From this angle, this bee is pretty much impossible to tell that it's a digger bee because it's super fuzzy. It has coloration that's similar to a bumblebee. Its name is the bumblebee-like digger bee. Its Latin name, bomboides, means like a bumblebee. The main difference here is that if you look at the hind leg, there's no pollen basket. But I think what I want to emphasize with some of these challenging lookalikes is that, oh, one more thing about digger bees. If you look at the head of a digger bee, they have this protruding nose or this little yellow extending ridge on their face, and they have no jointed antennae. Okay, so there are many bumblebee mimics in nature, and it's really challenging sometimes. So if you're wondering in the field, is it a bumblebee or not, I encourage you to catch it in the net, put it on ice, and take a closer look. Once you have it in your hand and you're still not sure, take a bunch of photos, submit them to Bumblebee Atlas. You're not bothering me if I'm going through images and have to figure out what it is. And if you have questions about it, I'm happy to provide feedback as well. But Amy and I and other colleagues in the Bumblebee Atlas, we look at every single image that gets submitted to Bumblebee Atlas. We have the species identification guide on the website that also talks about some key features for anatomy and things to look for. But if you really want to do a deep dive into Bumblebee ID, we recommend this book, Bumblebees of North America, or some of these free PDFs online. You will need bumblebees of the eastern US and western US, since right here in Montana, we're at a convergence zone, and we have both species. Also, Montana State University has a great website called the Bumblebees of Montana. There's some really great in-depth resources there as well. So I'll pause there. Any questions about life cycle or identification?
Michelle, there's one question that came into the Q&A that wasn't really about life cycle or identification. It has more to do with collecting. So maybe you could cover this later, but since it popped up, I'm going to ask it now. The question is, do you have to collect with a net or can you collect directly into the plastic specimen vials?
Yeah, we'll get a little bit into that later, but while we're thinking of it, we recommend that you use a net because sometimes the bees will be flying, but if you're out there doing your survey and a bumblebee is foraging on a flower, you can put the vial directly over the bee and put the cap on. That's something that I've used a lot, especially if the bees are a little bit slower and sleepy. But as far as required equipment for the project, we do want you to have a net for some of your surveys where bees are flying around. Any other questions that came in the Q&A, Amy?
One just popped into the chat about asking, Caitlin's asking, does the ID guide apply to both the workers and queens?
Yeah, the ID guide is just for female workers. So we want to we want to conduct our surveys during this peak worker activity. So we expect the majority of bees that you catch in your net will be these worker bees. Queens and males are also, they look different. They're challenging to identify. We will get some of them in our surveys, but in general, the ID guide we made just for the worker bees.
That's all the
Okay,
questions we've got. So you're good to go on.
great. Sounds good. I'm going to keep rolling, but if you do have questions that pop up, we encourage you to pop them in the Q&A. We'll have another session at the end to answer your questions. All right, so the next section is how to join the Montana Bumble Bee Atlas. We're going to go through everything that you need to actually conduct a survey, submit data, etc. So if you were a little bit sidetracked, distracted, now is the time to perk back up and pay attention. So there are 6 main steps to volunteer. It looks like a lot. We're going to break them down into different sections and explain to you how to do this. But the main things that you will be doing as an Atlas volunteer, you'll be attending or viewing a training event like you are doing right now for this webinar. You'll create a Bumblebee Watch account. You'll adopt a grid cell. You'll plan your survey, conduct 2 standardized surveys, submit your data to Bumblebee Watch, and then the last fun thing is to share and celebrate your contributions. So the first step is to complete the training. So this program follows a standardized protocol. It's important for volunteers to follow this so that we can analyze the data and compare this information over time. So options for training are what you're doing right now with this webinar. watching the whole thing or watching the recording later. The other option is the participant handbook. So this is a PDF document that is comprehensive and covers everything that you need to know to volunteer. We also have a new training video series on the website. I mentioned this at the beginning of the webinar, where we have broken down the different sections of volunteering and made these short training videos that you can watch in different segments. So any of those three options will set you up as a volunteer. The best way to learn is to practice in person. So there's a number of events that I'll encourage you to go to. We have one in Missoula, one outside of Glacier. We have one in Havre, one in Lewistown with American Prairie, and one in Ecology through the Montana Native Plant Society. I'm also working closely with Amy this year in Wyoming, and so just wanted to put a few Wyoming events here since they are northwestern Wyoming. So there's one event in Cody, one in Grand Teton, and another one in Yellowstone. To register for these events, you can go to the Bumblebee Atlas website and go to the events page. I really love these events. I wish that I could travel to more areas throughout the state, but it's really great to practice protocols in the field, connect with other volunteers, and ask your questions as you're actively completing a survey. So all of these events, like I mentioned, are listed on our website. You can go to the map and register from there. Okay, so the first one, you know how to do that now. Step 2 is to create a Bumblebee Watch account. So if you go to bumblebeewatch.org, you can create a Bumblebee Watch account. This is the only site that you'll need a username for. And the way that you register is at the bottom here. Step 3 is to adopt a grid cell. So Montana is broken into 179 grid cells. Each grid cell is approximately 50 kilometers by 50 kilometers. Once you adopt a grid cell, this is a commitment for you to survey at least twice in that grid cell between June 1st and August 31st. And this year we've broken our grid cells into high priority and low priority, with the darker purple being high priority. We do encourage you to go on a little adventure in Montana this year. We have a lot of central and eastern Montana that needs coverage. So if you have any road trips or if there's a place that you've always wanted to visit, we encourage you to do a survey there. That being said, if you live in a grid cell that's that lighter purple shade and you want to do surveys close to home, we still encourage you to participate. More data is always better, and we don't want you to not participate if you're in a lower priority grid cell. So to adopt a grid cell, you go to bumblebeeatlas.org and go to adopt a grid cell. I'm actually going to switch over there just to talk through a few of the logistics of how to adopt a grid cell. It might take a second for this map to load here. So the priority grid cells are also on this map. You just have to zoom in far enough to see that. And then a couple other things I wanted to show you here is that you can change the base map if it's easier for you. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. And as you zoom in, you can see the number of the grid cell will start to appear. It gets a little bit bigger the further that you zoom. And then at some point, the coloration goes away, but you can use this to plan where you are or where you might go, and then zoom back out to see the grid cell number. But you can change it between all of these different types of maps if that makes it easier for you. And then once you look around on this map for a little bit, choose your grid cell or grid cells that you want to adopt. You just fill out this brief form here underneath the map. And then we'll send you a confirmation email with more information about that. Okay, so a few notes. I already mentioned that you'll receive a confirmation email after you adopt. You can adopt more than one grid cell. We encourage you to adopt as many grid cells as you would like. More than one person can adopt each grid cell, and it's okay if you conduct a survey and submit data from outside your adopted grid cell. So let's say you're doing quite a bit of traveling and you can do surveys along your route that cross multiple grid cells. You don't have to adopt every single grid cell along your route. And if you find yourself in an area and you want to conduct a survey there, please feel free and do your survey. Adopting a grid cell is something that helps us as Bumblebee Atlas coordinators just get an understanding of where people are, where we need to concentrate our recruitment effort, and try to get coverage of the entire state by the end of the project. Okay, step 3 complete. Now we're going to talk about planning your survey. So this is when to survey, where to survey, your permits, and supplies. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to capture the diversity of bumblebees at the peak season, so peak worker bees. And here in Montana, that's between June 1st and August 31st. We want flowers to be in bloom while you're doing your surveys, temperatures to be between 60 and 90 degrees, low wind, we say generally less than 15 to 20 miles an hour, and no rain. These are lovely conditions to go for a walk, look for bumblebees, and generally be outside. I know some other programs like looking at birds or bats or other things, you may be in some uncomfortable field conditions, but generally for bumblebees, we want you to be pretty happy out there. You can choose a location to survey anywhere that has flowers. So we want you to select a 1 hectare area within your grid cell. A hectare we'll talk about a little bit later so that you can visualize your survey, but generally it's the inside of a track or 100 meters by 100 meters. You can survey anywhere within your grid cell as long as you have permission to be on that land or public land that we have permits for. So this could be natural areas, urban areas, roadsides, private land, and public land. We really rely on you and your local knowledge to choose a good location to do a survey. But please know and respect boundaries and don't trespass for this project. It's not worth it. So for private land, please make sure that you have explicit permission, preferably in writing, unless it's your own land. For roadsides, we'll talk about this later as well, but we want you to be careful doing these surveys. Don't cross fences and don't trespass. And we don't currently have permission to survey on tribal lands or Department of Defense, except for the CSKT tribal members. For public lands, we are funded by the Forest Service, and they have told us that no permits are required to conduct your surveys, including on wilderness areas. For BLM, please place the Xerces placard. This is found on the Bumblebee Atlas website. We want that placard to be in your dashboard, and we want you to contact the field office. I haven't updated this yet on our site, but I will be putting the local field office contact information on there for you. National parks are a little different. We have very specific requirements for our permits. Oftentimes, you will need to be added to the permit directly and carry a copy of that permit with you. Each park is a little bit different, but please know that we do have permits in Glacier and Yellowstone, but you do have to contact me first before you can go out and do those surveys. For county and local lands, like a lot of these areas are great for doing bumblebee surveys. We encourage you to reach out directly, and a lot of times land managers are very friendly and encouraging of you completing surveys. So as you plan your survey, keep your safety in mind since you're number 1. So make sure that someone knows where you'll be. And we generally recommend surveying with a partner. The surveys go a lot quicker. They're a lot more fun if you have someone with you. If you don't currently have a partner, we recommend that you use some of the resources like the Facebook private group. So we have one for Montana where you can just put a post that you're in a certain area looking for a field partner, and hopefully you can find a buddy that way. We encourage you to look at some different locations, have a plan of where you think that you'd want to go, but also have a backup plan just based on flowers in bloom, or maybe the site that you wanted to go to burned last year. There's just always surprises that happen when you plan your surveys. This isn't a survey where you would need to go to a random location. You have to go to that exact site and monitor over time. There's a lot of flexibility within your hectare, and you could just go to a different site that will work for your purposes during that point in time. So we really encourage flexibility with your planning. We always encourage you to check the weather before you go, since Montana summers are always variable. And this also applies to smoke and looking at air quality before you go out. A lot of locations are pretty remote in Montana, so we recommend that you are ready to navigate without cell service. Supplies that are required for this project are an insect net, data sheets and pencils, plastic vials to put the bees into, coolers with ice, a camera or a macro lens for your phone, a GPS unit or an app on your smartphone that can give you GPS location, a timer, a clipboard is kind of optional if you prefer that, and then field guides that you could use. Oftentimes there are many apps that you can use for these, or you can take a book out. So the nets that we recommend that you use, they're called standard or aerial insect nets. The most important thing is for the net to have see-through mesh. So some of these nets are made of canvas and you can't see the bee when it's in the net. So just make sure that you have that mesh on the net. There's a lot of different things that you can use for vials. We encourage you to bring at least 20 with you out in the field. Anywhere from 30 to 50 milliliter tubes work great, but you can also use a lot of things that you have around the house, like jars, plastic containers, prescription bottles, but just make sure that you wash them really well before you use them. Every time you conduct a survey, we ask that you sanitize your equipment. So the last thing that we want to do is transfer pathogens to bees. We recommend sanitization through alcohol, wipes, or you can use a diluted bleach solution with about 10% bleach. Or you can just wash the vials in soapy water and make sure that they dry completely before you use them again. For a cooler, we recommend that you use a small and portable one and use cubed or crushed ice. You don't want to use any of the blue ice or gel packs, since those are too cold and will actually freeze the bees. One other note about coolers is that you can also use a backpack cooler if you're doing hiking where you can't really carry a cooler. There's a lot of different options that you can use for cameras. So if you have a macro setting on your phone or on your camera, make sure that you use that. A lot of times that's indicated with a little flower icon. If you are using a cell phone, I highly encourage you to use a clip-on lens like the one shown here. This Zenvo lens is a 15x, but there's a variety of different options that you can find online. Just make sure that it fits your type of camera on your phone. But this magnification between 10 and 15x will make a pretty standard cell phone camera into something that is actually usable for taking photographs of bumblebees. For a timer, you can use your cell phone or you can use a watch. And for GPS, you can also use an app on your phone or an actual GPS unit. The data sheets we've updated for 2025. We haven't made any major protocol changes, but just for you to know, we've made it more consistent with the way that you enter data on Bumblebee Watch. So if you have old data sheets from last year, feel free to use them. Just know that these ones are a little bit more streamlined with the website. And if you have to print new ones, make sure that you print these. The supplemental data sheet is always important to carry with you in case you hit the jackpot and see tons of bumblebees out on your survey. So you have a lot of space to enter in additional bumblebees. And the second page has this grid that can be useful as a background for your photographs. A clipboard isn't required, but can be helpful to manage your data sheets. And all of this information is on the Bumblebee Atlas website under resources, equipment, including some links that you can use for different suppliers that we've liked using in the past. Okay, so now we get to the fun part where you're actually ready to conduct your survey. There's two main parts of this. So you'll be catching and photographing bees, and you'll be conducting habitat assessments and completing your data sheet. The point survey is the preferred survey method. So you'll choose a location that has plenty of flowers, and you'll estimate a 1 hectare area within your grid cell. This is something you don't have to measure this out or stake it. This is a visual estimate, and it doesn't have to be square. So in this case, this person came to the site. You can see behind him, there's quite a bit of grasses, and the hillside is covered with flowers. So he chose a rectangular area. And again, a 1 hectare area is 100 meters by 100 meters, or the inside of a track. When you're conducting your survey, you'll be searching and netting bees for 45 person minutes. What this means is that you'll divide 45 minutes by the number of people in your group. So if I go out and do a survey solo, I would search actively for bees for 45 minutes. If there were 2 people, it would be 22.5 minutes, 3 people, 15 minutes, etc. You'll walk through your entire survey area, looking at the different flowers in bloom, searching for bumblebees. It's really important to remember here that you might have some big, showy, beautiful flowers, but there's also really tiny blooming plants kind of in the understory. So you might need to crouch down and look around to see what's actually in bloom. The other thing that I recommend is listening for bees as you're walking your survey area, because they have this very distinct, loud, deep buzz, and you'll start to recognize the difference between a bumblebee and a fly, and you can actually hear the bumblebees while you're doing your survey. So once you see a bee, you'll capture it and you'll note the flower that you caught it off of. This information you'll record later on the data sheet. So I like to put a little bit of that flower in the file. And every time you catch a bee, you'll pause your timer, since that 45 minutes is active search effort, and any of the time that it takes to put it in the vial, put it on ice, or other things like maybe you need to take a sip of water or have a snack, you can just pause your timer and then continue when you're actively searching for bees again. Okay, now I'm going to show you a video of how to catch a bumblebee.
When you're out collecting your bumblebees, you want to make sure you're doing it carefully, but you also want to make sure you're doing it with a technique where you're actually going to be successful in capturing the bumblebee. Now, the best way to do it is to come from the side. You'll actually sweep over the tops of the flowers, but the most important part is to make sure you follow through and have the net droop over the side of the rim, and you can actually flip it over a 3rd time so the bee can't escape. And another way, you can come from below the bee if the flower's kind of drooping, and you can come up, but again, you have to have that follow through where you flip the net over the top. Another way, if you're feeling a little more timid about sweeping really hard, is bees tend to fly up when they try to escape. So you can actually put the net over the top of the flowers that it's on, and the bee will usually fly up to the top of the net, or once it gets about halfway, you can just tip the net over, and then it'll be captured in the bottom of your net.
Okay, now I'm going to share with you another video about getting the bee into the vial.
So once you've collected your bee, you're going to gather the net up so that the bee is restricted to one part of the net. And then you're going to take your vial with the lid off, slide it up the net to that area where you've kind of narrowed or bottlenecked the net. You'll slide the bee into the vial and keep that net nice and tight over the top of the vial. Once he's in there, you can take your lid, you can slide it up the net to get to where the top of the vial is. And then you can sometimes keep the net inside the opening and then slide the net out once your lid's on top. Or you can just, if he's cooperating or she's cooperating, you can just slide the lid right over the top, and then you've got your bumblebee. Once you've collected it, you can put it in your cooler or put it on ice, or so you can prepare to process that bee once you're done with your survey. Once you've collected your bee, another thing that's helpful to do post-processing is to collect a flower that you collected the bee on, and you can pop the flower into the vial with the bee you collected on that plant. So when you're processing the bee later, you remember what flower it was collected on.
Okay, so Amy dropped links from those videos into the chat if you want to watch those videos later. We also have them posted on the Regional Bumblebee Atlas website. Just a couple takeaways from the video. I really encourage you to practice this. So catching and handling bees is something that takes a little bit of practice. You can go in your backyard in a park, you can catch flies if you don't want to catch a stinging insect. But this is something that you just need to gain a little bit of practice. Okay, so a few things to mention about putting bumblebees on ice. So ice will chill the bee, it will immobilize them while they are chilled. They are not moving, they are not stinging, and this doesn't cause any harm to the bee. It does take a little bit of time for the bees to be chilled to the point that you can handle them. So we expect at least 15 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer on a hot day. If they are still moving in the vial after that time, just give them more time. You don't want to try to handle and photograph bees while they're moving because they will quickly warm up and fly away. Don't leave them on ice for longer than 90 minutes. This can harm them, but that should give you plenty of time to take all of the photographs. When you put the vials in your cooler, make sure that the caps are above the ice line. You don't want to accidentally have water leak into your vial and drown the bees. Either crushed or cubed ice will work, and don't use those blue ice packs that can harm the bees. When you complete the data sheet, there's different sections, and just to chat through this really quick, the top section is location and survey information. This is basic information of who you are, where you are, etc. I recommend doing this as soon as you get to a site so that you have that header information filled out. We also ask for information on habitat and land management. We'll ask you to document the top 15 flowers in bloom and to record all of your bumblebees, the photos that you took, the host plant, and what sex the bumblebee was. And the last part of the data sheet is volunteer data. So this is the hours that you spent on your survey and the mileage. Okay, so this bumblebee observations section, we do ask for species, but it's okay if you don't know. You can always use Bombus sp, which means some kind of bumblebee species. Every single photo that you submit to Bumblebee Watch will get reviewed by myself or one of my colleagues. If you want to learn Bumblebee ID, we highly encourage you to do this. We do have some resources for you to help, but it's not required that you know all of the species in Montana. Since you're documenting the top 15 plants in your survey, we recommend a few resources for you. So apps that I really like are Wildflowers of Montana and iNaturalist. These are both free apps. The Wildflowers of Montana gives you options where you can say what color the petals are, or what the form of the plant is, what habitat you're in, and it will narrow down some species for you. And iNaturalist will use AI to identify a plant, and then it can be confirmed by community members. If you like a good, reliable field guide as a book, I recommend The Plants of the Rocky Mountains. Also, one thing to mention about plants is that we hope that you can get the plant recorded to genus level. If you don't know the species, if there's a lot of lookalikes, it's okay to just put the genus. Okay, now we're going to talk about photographing bumblebees. This is absolutely the most important part of the project, since this is the data that will get analyzed by myself and our partners. So we really need these high quality photographs. They need to be in focus, they need to be zoomed in or cropped, and generally not in the shadows. A good indicator of whether you've taken a good photo is whether you can see the individual hairs of the bumblebees. Also, colors can get distorted by some cameras or some backgrounds. So take a look at your photos and see if the colors of your images are matching the color of the bee that you see in real life. So a few photo tips for you is to understand your equipment. So whether you're using a digital camera or your cell phone, just start practicing with objects in your home or things in your backyard to make sure that you can adjust things like the light balance or focus. While you're doing your survey, make sure that bees are completely still, they're not moving while you're trying to photograph them. I recommend that you use a neutral colored background because this will help with the colors of your photos. Also pay attention to shadows. If you're doing a survey in the middle of the day, the bright light and the shadows can both distort the images. So watch out for that. And also look out for the wind, because when bees are immobile and you're taking photos of them, it's really easy for them to just blow away. So when you upload photos to Bumblebee Watch, there's 6 photos that you can upload per bee. We recommend that you take more than 6 photos in the field, just so that you have a number of options to choose from. So things that you want to make sure that you're photographing, these are things that will assist us in identification. So you want to take a photo of the hind leg. You want to take a photo or a number of photos of the head. So you want to make sure that you are photographing the top of the head, the base of the antennae, and the cheek length. And the cheek length is shown here in this diagram. It's basically the space between the lower end of the eye and the jaw segment. And different bees have a different length of space in that area. And so this is one of the key features for Bumblebee ID, and we absolutely need a high quality photograph of this. We need photos of the thorax from the top and the side of the bee. We need to see all of the abdominal segments. So a top view and a side view is really helpful here. Here are some examples for high quality photos that we just love. So the one on the left is a side profile. You can see all of the coloration of the abdomen. You can see the color underneath the wings, and you can even see the colors on the head and the cheek length. I can get a lot of information from that one photo. The photo of the abdomen and the thorax, this is a great photo. I can see all of the coloration, and you can see here that the wings are spread, so it's not covering anything up. And then here's a good example of a photo of the face where you can see the hairs on the face and the cheek length. So a few photo tips for you. This one is fairly obvious, but make sure that your photos are in focus. Sometimes you might take a series of photographs in the field and then come back to your house and realize that you didn't get great photos. So we always encourage you to check before you finish your survey or before you finish handling that specific bee. Check the lighting of your photos. Make sure that you know how to adjust and edit the lighting before you upload to Bumblebee Watch. I encourage you to take a photo of the bee when it's on its back. So when the bees get placed on ice, they tend to curl up. So this photo on the left, the bee is curled. This is a photo of the top of the head and the thorax, but you really can't see any of the features on the head. So if you just flip it over on its back, you can get great photos of the head and the face. So this is an example of a bee that got drowned in a vial. So we basically can't do anything with these photos. You can't see the coloration of the hairs or the key features that are needed for identification. So this is not great for the bee and not great for identification. Make sure that the vials are sealed and that when you place those vials on ice, that the cap is sitting above the ice line. It's totally fine to handle the wings gently with your fingers so that you can see all of the colors of the abdominal segments. We also don't mind if you have your thumbs or your fingers in the photos. You're not taking Nat Geo quality photos, but just high enough quality photos so that we can see those hairs and the coloration. And we also have some resources for you to remember how to do this and what photos to take. So the backside of your ID guide will look at some of those features that are important to photograph, as well as this one-page cheat sheet that will walk you through the different types of photos that you need. And as I showed earlier, we have on our resources page some additional photography tips if you want to look those up. Okay, the other type of survey is called a roadside survey. So point surveys are a favorite for a lot of reasons, but there may be some reasons that you would do a roadside survey. One example is when there's not public land available, or if you don't have permission to survey on private land. Also, flowers just grow well on roadsides. So sometimes things will be dry and desiccated in other places, and then you'll go to the side of the road and have lots of flowers and lots of bees. Also, you might do a roadside survey if you're traveling between different survey sites doing point surveys. So this is definitely a method that can be used. The way that you do this is that you conduct 5 surveys along a 10-mile stretch of road. You want each of those sites to be at least a half a mile apart, and you are doing the same methodology as you did for a point survey, but a shorter time frame. So at each of those 5 sites, you are searching for bumblebees for 15 person minutes. The same rule applies. You divide 15 minutes by the number of people who are in your group, and you make sure that you pause your timer every time you're transferring a bee or every time that you're taking a break. So you'll be processing and releasing the bees at each site, and you'll complete 1 data sheet and 1 habitat assessment for each 15-minute survey. So at the end of your roadside survey, you'll have 5 data sheets. We want you to take care of yourself when you are doing these roadside surveys. So we recommend that you choose a less traveled road like county roads. Pay attention to traffic. Don't get so wrapped up in looking for bumblebees that you forget to look up periodically for wildlife or vehicles. We recommend that you wear bright colors or a safety vest and always be aware of property lines so that you're not trespassing. If you didn't see any bees at a site and you were following the conditions, so good weather, no winds, no rain, and you still didn't see any bees, that's okay. So still complete the data sheet, complete the habitat assessment, upload your data, because these null surveys are still providing valuable data. So this is effort that you spent in an area during our survey window and you didn't see any bees. So this is something that happens fairly frequently. You didn't do anything wrong, and please submit this data. Incidental observations are ways that you can quickly take a photo of a bumblebee and submit it to Bumblebee Watch outside of your formal survey. This is still important information. We just encourage you to take multiple photos and high quality photos. Please record the host plant and you can upload it to Bumblebee Watch as an incidental observation. This can help inform locations of rare bees, or just some interesting findings that you didn't see during a survey. Okay, I just realized there's one very important thing that I didn't mention in an earlier step, is that after your bees have been chilled on ice and you've taken a series of photographs, the bees will gently warm back up. And so you can just leave them in a shady place. They usually warm up very quickly and fly off, but we have had a couple instances where bees just take a while to warm back up. This protocol has been tried and tested for a very long time and really minimizes harm. But just to emphasize, this is a catch and release protocol and the bees will fly off unharmed. Okay, so once you have completed your data sheet, your next step is to organize and upload your data. Everyone has a little bit of a different process for doing this, so this is something that you can find a method that works for you. So the screenshot here, you can see that the bees are all numbered. So there's a number 9, and then all of the bees after that correspond with that individual observation until there's the next number and then additional bees. Another way to do this is to take a photo of the sky or of a rock or something and break up your camera roll, because you're going to finish a survey and your camera roll is going to be 100% bees and you need a way to divide those up. So there's a space on your data sheet where you can record photo numbers, you can record the number that you have assigned to that specific bee, like shown here, or you can do the time, like the timestamp on those photos. That's a range of when you started photographing that bee and when you finished. So for organizing photos, we recommend that you spend a little bit of time just looking through the photos, selecting the ones that are in focus and the highest quality photos that show the different angles that we need. You may need to spend a little bit of time cropping these images or adjusting the light settings. And then you can log into the Bumblebee Watch website and go to Add Sightings. From there, you will select Bumblebee Atlas, so the option on the right. This is where you submit your surveys, including null surveys. The option on the left that says Bumblebee Watch, those are incidental observations and not Bumblebee Atlas surveys. There's this option on the bottom that says select from regional projects. Just ignore that. You don't have to select anything there. Okay, so when you go to enter your data, it should be fairly streamlined, that the data sheet will match the online form. So every field that you have on the data sheet, there will be a form directly on Bumblebee Watch. I'm not going to go into too many details about this, but we have a few resources to help with this. So if you go to the data section of Bumblebee Atlas, there's a how to submit data section that walks you through the different steps with screenshots. And Amy and I put together, during our training series, we have a video that's specific to uploading data to Bumblebee Watch. So we recommend watching that resource when you're ready to enter your data. Okay, so you have done all of the important things of preparing for your survey, conducting your survey, and uploading data. So you now know everything you need to do for that. The last thing that you can do is share your experiences. So we have a private Montana Bumble Bee Atlas Facebook group. Amy can drop that link in the chat. You can also follow us on Instagram or Blue Sky, but we love to hear your photos and love to hear stories of your experiences. The next steps that you can do are just understand where our resources are. So get familiar with the website and start to plan your survey. So you can adopt a grid cell, purchase and gather supplies, start planning where you want to survey. You can reach out to me for any questions that you have by emailing me at mtbumblebeeatlas@xerces.org. Please also reach out for any permits or letters that you need. And once you are all set up and ready to go, you can start completing your surveys and have fun while you're at it. So that is all of the information that I wanted to share. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I am here to support you all as volunteers in this process. And a lot of questions can be answered at the Bumblebee Atlas website. So I know I saw some questions come in the chat, but I'm happy to answer that for the next 10 minutes or so.
Yep, Michelle, there's I think 5 in the Q&A and 1 or 2 in the chat, just that I kind of left for you to answer for everyone.
Okay.
So one of them is about the hectare of a survey spot. This was in the chat. Could you use a combo of 2 backyards that are a couple blocks apart but in the same grid number for your survey?
Yeah, so you can select 2 sites in your grid cell. We just recommend that they're at least a half mile away. This is about the distance that a bumblebee would fly, and we just don't want to have overlap in surveys. So you can separate it, but just a little bit further than what you mentioned.
Great. Then there was 2 related questions, one in the chat and one in the Q&A about permits. Are permits needed for Montana state parks or other state lands in Montana?
Oh, that's a good question. So yeah, please feel free to reach out with the specific state park that you would like to survey in, and I can look into getting a permit there. We don't have a blanket permit for state parks currently. They're required to do them individually. So let me know where you want to go and I will look into the permit process.
Great. There's another question. I think that you kind of covered it, but I just wanted you to explicitly answer this one. Can we conduct more than the 2 required surveys?
Oh, thanks for asking this question. Yes, please, Christy. Yeah, more data is definitely welcome. And so if you want to complete more than 2 surveys in that grid cell, you're more than welcome to do so. Also, if you want to go to another grid cell, we encourage that as well. So there's only a minimum, not a maximum.
Yeah, so there's a couple questions just about the survey sites. So it just came into the chat. Do you need to go? No, it just went away. Do you need to go to the same sites on each survey? And then there's a related question in the Q&A about the minimum or maximum number of days between the 2 surveys. So do you want to just talk about choosing your survey spots and timing?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a little bit of flexibility in how you choose to do this. And so you can choose one location and go back to that same location a second time, or you can choose 2 different locations within that grid cell. It's really up to you and what works for you and your schedule. If you choose 2 different locations, there isn't a required time in between those surveys. So you could theoretically do your 2 sites on one day as long as they're a half a mile apart. There is a little bit of a benefit if you stagger your surveys because we're going to get different diversity of bees throughout the season. But I think that with having lots of people involved in this program, hopefully we're getting data that's representing that. So I guess that was a very long way of saying that it depends and it's up to you and what works for you.
Nice. Oh, 2 related questions. So the first one, is it better to adopt a high priority cell or go somewhere where you know there are many, many, many bumblebees?
Oh, that's hard. Yes. For this project, we are trying to get coverage of the entire state. We want to see what bumblebee species are out in these remote areas of, Montana. So yes, I know that's a hard question to answer, but I think going to a higher priority grid cell is more important than going to a location that will have lots of bees. Or the best thing is to go to both places.
Yeah, it's hard to not want to go to the places where there's so many bees because that's so fun.
Yeah.
Do you have a best time of day to recommend?
There's also some flexibility around this. So you want to go when it's between 60 and 90 degrees. I find that going earlier in the day is better because you're going to find flowers still have their nectar resources. So I think 10 and 2 is like the ideal time frame, but it also depends on the weather and the day. So bumblebees will fly early in the morning until late in the evening, but I think if you go during that middle part of the day, you'll see generally higher abundance, except for if it's a really, really hot day. Then they're not going to be active around 90 degrees. So personally, I like to go between like 10 and noon and see the highest abundance there, but it'll depend based on habitat and time frame and all of that.
Yeah, nice. That's a big deal in the mountain states where we have some really hot places, so have to go early in the morning if you want to beat the heat. There's one more question that came into the Q&A. Should you number the vials so that the first bee captured is the first you process? Otherwise, some bees might stay on ice much longer than others.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Gary. So it's not as important for processing the bees in the order that you caught them. Generally, you shouldn't take 90 minutes to process all of your bees. That is plenty of time to get through everything. So the numbering of the vials is most important for keeping track of photographs, but not so much for processing the bees. My method, I don't label any vials. I just put the flower inside the vials and I will throw them all in there. And once I'm ready to process, I will process based on who's not moving at that time. And I'll get through taking photos, even of a lot of bees. It still goes pretty quickly.
One more thing, Michelle, I answered the question when it came up, but it's come up a lot in emails from people as well. Could you just talk about you mentioned it, that you need a login for Bumblebee Watch, but not for Bumblebee Atlas, and there's been a lot of confusion about that. You want to just mention that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bumblebee Watch is where you'll be submitting all of your data. All of the data is tied to your username. You can go in and see information about your submissions. So that is where you'll need a username, is Bumblebee Watch. The Bumblebee Atlas website was built in a format that had a lot of features that we decided that we didn't need to use all of them. And there was a point in the not too far away past where it prompted you to create a login for the Bumblebee Atlas page. You do not need that login information. There's no information that is username. So if there was any confusion about that, I apologize. We have since removed it from the Bumblebee Atlas website. But you will not need a username for that. Okay, I think, was that everything, Amy?
Yep, that is all of the questions.
Great. Well, good questions. Really appreciate all of your time for being here tonight. I'm sure that more questions will pop up as you ponder these things, so please feel free to reach out. And I'm very excited to see your Bumblebee Atlas start coming in once the season starts in June. So thank you so much for your time.